Hello again and welcome to the October edition of Kirklees Local TV's History Programme. I'm Dave Hodgson. Now, this month we're putting our business suits on and featuring a long-established local firm which counts many notable people within its clientele. It deals in cloth and, to underline the point, it's still cutting it in the traditional way. Long-bladed scissors. Working surfaces as long as a cricket pitch. All fixtures and fittings crafted from mahogany, and buyers who'll go to the ends of the earth to get the cloth of best quality, colour and weave that you would like. Dugdale Brothers is established just a stone's throw from KLTV studios in Northumberland Street here in Huddersfield, overseen by Managing Director Simon Glendenning. So, how long has Dugdale Brothers been established?
Dugdale's was established in 1896 by two brothers, Henry and Frederick, and they were originally based in Station Street, about 300 yards from where we are now, as credit drapers and woolen and trimmings merchants.
Mm-hmm. That would be to me something a bit like Burton's, sort of suits on the tick, but it wasn't like that at all, was it?
No. I mean, you've got to think back to that period of time, which I suppose is really the sort of heyday of fine worsted manufacturing, as it had become, and not the tail end of the Industrial Revolution, but I suppose the prime years of the Industrial Revolution. And of course this was long before ready-to-wear clothing had come about. So an area like Huddersfield, which was famous throughout the world for the quality of the worsted cloth that was made here, also spawned hundreds of bespoke tailors. In those days, if you wanted a suit made for you, you could only go to a bespoke tailor. There's no way you could go to a shop and buy one off the peg. So you either had clothes made for you by a bespoke tailor. If you couldn't afford that, you probably bought them second hand. And if you couldn't afford that, then your wife would have made, or your partner, whatever, would have made something for you.
From whatever happened
Absolutely.
To be available. Yeah. How did it get to the original beginnings to what Dugdale Brothers are now? Because you've expanded quite a bit in your time, haven't you?
Well, we have. I think that there have been periods of time, there's feast and famine to a certain extent. I think probably the first feast was brought about by the First World War, and certainly the First World War and the need for uniforms spawned what was the beginning of ready-to-wear clothing. And of course an awful lot of those clothiers or manufacturers were based within the area, or primarily closer to Leeds. So that would have been a very, very busy and profitable time. There was a contract which Dugdale's won during the First World War, which was to supply a cloth which was used for I think it was the French Navy, but also the British Army, two different cloths obviously, which would have been very, very large volumes. I suspect it wasn't terribly lucrative, but the volumes would have been very big.
On the subject of history, in the past you must have needed different cloth to what we have now, and as fashion's changed, I can't believe that you just dealt in cloth.
I think that the main thing to remember from our point of view is that as we go back to maybe the late 19th century, obviously when we started, we were only dealing with a domestic market, i.e. the UK. Our main customer base was in the north of England, although we did obviously sell in London, which is where the biggest concentration was. But it was at a time which predates central heating. So if you lived in the north of England, in and around Huddersfield, the climate would have been dramatically different from this long summer we have now. You'd be a bit cold sometimes. You'd be very, very cold. There was no central heating. There were lots of little individual coal fires blasting a little bit of heat out. And you wore clothing to compensate for where you lived. Therefore, heavier woolen clothings were really what we specialised in. Now, as the markets have changed over the years, and other countries have come in and tried to replicate what we do and have been very clever at producing lightweight equivalents in a little flimsy 6-7 ounce cloths.
Bit of lace on it, things like that.
Well, maybe. Not on a suit, perhaps.
Probably not.
Our speciality was cloth which was suited to our area. And as the markets have changed and some of these lighter weight countries producing lighter weight fabrics have become very popular, there does seem to be a swing away from that, where people want to have something which has more character and personality. And that's really where the cloth that we produce really does have character and personality. And the analogy that I often use is that if you're cutting a very, very lightweight cloth, it's rather like putting a hot knife through a cold block of butter. There's just no resilience whatsoever. If you're cutting good Huddersfield cloth, it's like taking a very, very sharp knife and cutting the most beautiful piece of raw beef. And you can feel the resistance and the structure of the cloth that you're cutting through. And that's really what makes the big difference between us and many of our competitors.
I should imagine the working, how you do it, the backup staff are almost as important as the buyers and the inspectors, because it must have taken a heck of a lot of transit clerks and people to book the material in and the material out and keep the accounts. I should imagine it was a fairly hands-on business.
Oh, it would have been very hands-on. Of course, this was long before the days of computerization. And if we dig back into some of our old archive materials that we still have here, we've got a lot of postcards which are dated from, I would say, the turn of the century, but I'm not talking about the last century, I'm talking about the one, early 1900s.
1900s, yeah.
When people placed orders by postcard and letter. And in those, this was the precursor to an email. It was a postcard from a tailor in Scunthorpe asking for X many yards of Barathea, but in it there would be a bit of a note, lovely weather here, how are things in Huddersfield type of thing. Yeah. Which was very sort of interesting to cast our minds back to that sort of time.
Yeah. Don't want to put you on the spot particularly, but how did you get involved?
I have known Robert Charnock. So basically there've only ever been two owners of the business. There was the Dugdale family, Henry and Frederick, who were brothers, and then obviously their extended families. And the last Dugdale who was involved in running the business was the widow of, I'm not sure which one, and it was obviously not them, it was their extended family. And that was Betty Dugdale. Now Betty, at some stage, I think probably in the 1960s or maybe the early 70s, had employed a man called Keith Charnock as sales director. And ultimately, Keith bought the business in the early 80s. He owned and ran it for the next 20 years, and then he passed it to his son, Robert. Now, Robert and I became firm friends in the mid-2000s when I was running a separate business which is involved in making made-to-measure tailored suits for most of the top-end retailers in the UK. And the company that I was running at that time just happened to be the largest customer for Dugdale Brothers. So Robert and I met, had a good business relationship over that period of time. I went off and did a couple of other things, and then we re-established contact about 5 or 6 years ago.
And here you are now in the... It's not fair to call it the cloth trade, is it? What would you actually call yourselves?
Well, this is the cloth trade. We are cloth merchants. And we operate in rather the same way as a timber merchant who would buy an entire tree and then chop it up and sell it for different prices depending on the quality, or a butcher.
So you've got to have a lot of nous about you, I would think. This is almost like being on the stock exchange. You've got to know what is going to be popular in the future and get hold of that now, so you've got it when suddenly there's the big demand. And therein lies the skill, doesn't it?
Which is very difficult. And I suppose that when we were dealing primarily with UK customers, which was our bread and butter from when we started until probably the 70s, when people began to look overseas. And of course, the moment we began to look overseas, then you're affected by different climates in different countries. And now we sell throughout the world, and it's very, very difficult to gauge what the requirements are for different climates at different times of the year. And it's almost impossible to get it right.
Just sound confident or something, yeah?
Absolutely.
For all it's a big international company, you have in the past had extremely local things, including the most ginormous party, I believe, which was in the cutting room, was it?
So in 2016, we celebrated our 120th anniversary. And we felt that it was time to sort of raise our profile and do something a little bit more extravagant than we have done in the past. Because being northern based, we're humble and down to earth, and we don't like throwing money around. But we converted our main cutting room on the second floor of the building that we're in now into a very, very fine and rather sophisticated dining room for one night. And we brought in a very well-known local restaurateur who catered for us, and we had 30 of our best customers and distributors from all over the world.
And it worked, but goodness me, you'd have to put the caterer somewhere else other than the cutting room.
Oh, well, the caterer was on the ground floor.
Right.
With a mobile.
Oh, and of course you've got a
kitchen.
lift, so you're able.
Yeah.
Oh, well thought out, well thought out. What changes can you make for individual customers? For instance, if someone came and said, love that material, but it's too shiny, I want it matte, can that sort of thing be done?
Absolutely, yeah. We do that frequently. Obviously, depending on the size of the customer and the complexity or the size of the order that they're placing, we will do whatever is required. But it has to be within the realms of commerciality.
Yeah. We've talked generally about suits. Is suiting 100% of your trade?
Tailoring is probably 90%. We have dabbled in the world of interiors, and we've many of our cloths, particularly those which are made from British wool, British wool being rather coarser and consequently more hard-wearing, is very suitable for upholstery. So we, over the last 3 or 4 years, we've supplied several of the largest upholstery manufacturers in this country with cloth for those purposes.
So not all suits then?
Not all suits, not all suits.
Now, I'm sat here talking to you, and excuse me, guys and gals, I'm going to move my head, because can you see that there? And I've been dying to ask all this time, Simon, what is that cup and how did you come about it? Because it is to do with your trade, isn't it?
Oh, it is. It's called the White Rose Trophy, and there were actually two. There was the White Rose Shield, which is in our office in London, and the White Rose Trophy. And the White Rose Trophy was for London tailors. I think London and the home counties tailors. And the White Rose Shield was for provincial tailors. And it was simply, I think it actually says it on there, it's to mark excellence in the profession of tailoring. And I think we started in 1908, and we gave it, or a particular customer was awarded this prize for 1 year, and it would reside in their premises for that period of time, probably in their sort of shop front window where they could show off.
Well, it would be, wouldn't it? Yes, that's the first place I'd think of putting it, but these days I'm not so sure.
No, absolutely. No. Reinforcement.
It's been great talking to you, and I know this is I know it's a history programme, but what about the future for Dugdale Brothers and yourself?
Well, I think the future for Dugdale Brothers is very bright, because although we've been doing what we do very well for 122 years now, maybe we've been a little bit blinkered in terms of how far we can take the business. And when you look at a privately owned business like this, which is in the centre of a town which is as famous as Huddersfield, although I don't think that we in Huddersfield give it enough credit for its fame. We're much better known in Tokyo or certain parts of China or the Far East, and Italy as well, which is our great competitor for cloth. They have a much better regard for what we do than we seem to have ourselves. So residing in this rather strange Gothic building in the centre of Huddersfield, which is a wonderful sort of tailor-made headquarters for a historic brand.
And in the right place too.
Absolutely, yeah. You know, a stone's throw from the station. So from that point of view, it is, to a certain extent, a sort of ready-made heritage brand waiting to be marketed to a much, much bigger audience.
Tradition and quality still thriving in Kirklees. My thanks to MD Simon Glendenning and his staff. That's it for this month. Next month? Not really sure, because, let's face it, history's still being made here, isn't it? Dave Hodgson for KLTV. Goodbye, and if you're working on a history project, good hunting.